Okay, hello everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. This is Drew Amoroso again, and thanks for joining us today for the Designing Your Remote Workday webinar. We're gonna go ahead and jump right in. Today's topic is on creating separation between work and your personal life. So a quick reminder that if for some reason we happen to get disconnected during the webinar, please stay in the room and we'll get it back up and running as fast as we can. So this is part 3 of our 6-part series that we're putting on. And again, the goal of this series is to provide you with some actionable takeaways that you can use to start to reshape what your workday looks like in an effort to adjust to what is going to be the new work reality for us for the foreseeable future. So this webinar is the halfway point of our series, and our remaining topics coming up next week include building a home workspace on Monday, time and task management on Wednesday, and then we're going to finish up next Friday with Workday Wellness. Okay, so here's our agenda for today. We're going to go ahead and dive right into 4 ways that you can create separation in your day. And as with all of our webinars, what we want to do is just give you some simple, actionable ideas for how you can start to put concepts into practice and use them right away. And then we'll finish, as we always do, by leaving you with some final thoughts, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. So as we move through the webinar today, I encourage you to ask any questions that come to mind. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see a button that says Q&A, and that will allow you to ask questions during the webinar. Just go ahead and type them in the box. If you want to ask questions anonymously, you can also do that as well by just checking the little box there that pops up on your screen. Right now, to kind of kick this off, I want to do a quick poll to just get a sense of what the biggest challenge is that we're all facing right now when it comes to creating separation between work and home life. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll. And you should see a box pop up with a couple of questions there. So the question here is, what's the biggest challenge you're facing when it comes to creating separation between work and your home life? So there are lots of challenges that we face. I put 4 up here on 4 up here in this poll that I think are probably 4 of the biggest ones. Number 1 is having a definitive start to your workday. Number 2 is having a definitive end to your workday. Number 3 is personal responsibilities that might interrupt your work time. And then number 4 is trouble with using an area in your home as a workspace. All of those are presenting challenges for us right now when it comes to creating separation between work and home life. So go ahead and enter your responses, and we will share those in just a second. So while we're waiting for some of those responses to come in, let's go ahead and jump right in. I'm not going to spend too much time today on why it's a good idea for us to create separation in our day. I think we all understand that one of the challenges we face right now is the ability to add definition to our workday and to create space between our work and our personal time, right? So without that separation, it's hard for us to show up at our best in either situation. And because we're spending so much time inside and at home right now, there's a tendency for us to let both work and personal blend into one another. So I'm going to give you some specific ideas on how you can create that separation today. But as we are thinking of ways to do this, I want you to think about 3 major themes here that will help you come up with some of your own ideas. The first one is your workday mindset. So we talked about this in part 1, but one of the ways we can keep work at work is to bring this moment-to-moment level of awareness about the way that we're navigating through our workday. When we're working from home, there are all sorts of opportunities for us to be distracted and pulled into different directions. And so our ability to be intentional about how we think during our workday will just help us to keep work at work and block out many of those distractions. The second theme is routines and rituals. So in our last webinar, we talked about how to create a workday routine. And the reason that routines and other workday rituals are so valuable is because they give our brain the kind of structure and certainty that it needs to operate throughout the day. So our minds actually crave this kind of structure, and having routines throughout the day helps us stay in a very work-related mindset. And then the third theme is boundaries. So one of the keys to creating separation, obviously, is to create boundaries, both physical and then metaphorical boundaries. And so as we're moving through our talk today, keep thinking about how you can set up as many boundaries as you can that will help to divide your work life from your home life. Okay, let's go ahead and end the poll, and I'll publish it. Looks like the top two, really no surprises here. Having a definitive end to my workday and having a definitive start to my workday are the top ones. And then looks like third is personal responsibilities, interrupting work time, and then using an area in my home as a workspace is in fourth. No surprises there. Having a clear start and end time to your workday is one of the biggest challenges that we're facing right now. So we're going to actually speak to how to address all four of these challenges right now. And we're going to do that by covering four different concepts today. So concept number one is morning and end of day routines. Concept number two is a well-defined workspace. Concept number three is a concept that we call Parkinson's Law, which I'll explain here in a second. And then concept four is workday rituals. So let's go ahead and start with concept one, morning and end of day routines. So we touched on briefly on these concepts in previous webinars, but I really want to focus in on them and shine a really bright light on their importance today. Again, the repetition of routines sends signals to our brain that allow us to enter a certain state of focus and have a certain kind of mindset. So what we're trying to do here is signal to our brain that it's time to enter our workday on the one hand, and that it's time to exit our workday on the other hand. So I'm guessing that many of us are not missing what it was like to have to commute to work. So maybe you had to deal with traffic, or you had to contend with a crowded bus, or maybe a subway. But one of the things that actually can be very valuable about a commute is that it's a very clear signal to us that our day is starting or that our day is ending. And also allows us to have what I would call a ramp up period and a cool down period at the front and back end of our day. So if you're someone who used to have a commute and you don't have that right now, the idea here is to recreate the entering and exiting of your day. So instead of just waking up and going right over to your desk or your workspace, do something that is similar to your morning commute. And instead of just moving from your home work desk right to your couch or your favorite chair at the end of the day, do something that would be similar to your evening commute. It really helps you to keep the two separate. So that might be something like a 10-minute walk. Maybe you listen to podcasts or some music, maybe make a phone call, whatever it is that you used to do that would help to signal the start and end of your day. Or if you'd like to create a new routine that will help to create some of that separation using some of these techniques, that would be helpful as well. So the first idea here is to do what you can to recreate your commute. The second idea is one that we've touched on in a previous webinar, and that's this idea of what I would call an open up and a shut down routine. So in all the hundreds of professionals that I have trained over the years, I have found that this single concept has been the most effective across the board, hands down. So the idea here is really very simple. What we want to do is create a list of 3 to 5 things that you can do each day to start the day that are focused on planning your day. And then at the end of your day, you do 3 to 5 things that will help you shut it down and put a definitive end to your workday. So in terms of your open up routine, your list could include some simple things like number 1, reviewing your calendar for that day and for the rest of the week. Number 2, identifying one key project that you want to work on that day, right? The one big thing that you really need to move forward that day. Number 3 could be blocking off some distraction-free time on your calendar. So maybe you say, you know what, from from 2:30 until 3:30. I'm going to disable my email notifications. I'm going to put my phone in the other room. I'm going to block out every distraction that I can. I'm going to shut my door, and I'm going to focus on that one really big project that I need to move forward in a distraction-free environment. Really, really valuable thing for us to do throughout a day. And then number 4, maybe you just want to identify one thing that you can do that day to take care of yourself at work, right? We want to make sure that we are keeping our wellness as part of this equation. So maybe you say, you know what, my goal today is to get up at least once an hour from my desk or my workspace, or maybe you're going to take 2 15-minute walks around the block throughout the day. Just one thing that you know will help you stay well throughout the day. Then at the end of the day, we go through a similar list that helps you to shut it down for the day. So for example, you might want to review your calendar for tomorrow to get a sense of your first hard deadline. You may want to put away your work materials second. And then, as we mentioned in our last webinar, you might want to help to solidify the routine and create a positive end to your day by thinking about 2 things that went really well for you that day, and then you are done. And again, the idea here is to keep your list short and repeat these routines every day. No more than 3 to 5 things, because we don't want to overcrowd this list and you want to actually use it. Super simple, but highly effective way to create some containment around your workday. So that is concept 1, morning and end of day routines. Concept 2 is a bit of a placeholder because it's the topic of our next webinar, but I wanted to put it here since it's a key way that we can help to create separation in our day, and that's building a well-defined workspace. And what we're going to be talking about next time is how to create a workspace that is both comfortable for us to work in, but that also creates those physical and metaphorical boundaries that I was mentioning earlier. So even though we may be working in smaller spaces and having to share them with significant others or with roommates, we can still effectively create really good boundaries if we operate under a set of some specific rules. So I mentioned this here because it's a major part of creating separation, and I want to give you a preview of what we'll be covering on Monday. Concept 3 is one of my favorite concepts personally, and it's called Parkinson's Law. So there was a man by the name of Cyril Northcote Parkinson, and he was a British naval historian and an author from the 1960s. And he is credited with a saying that we can use that eventually became known as Parkinson's Law. And here's the idea. Work expands to fill the time available for its completion. Work expands to fill the time available for its completion. So what does that mean? The general idea here is that the amount of time we give ourselves to perform work will be the amount of time it takes us to complete that work. So, for example, if I give myself an open-ended amount of time to work, I'm more likely to keep finding reasons to just continue to work on a project or a task for longer than it has to take. And my work is much less focused. So without a hard deadline, I'm not really forced to concentrate as hard. However, if I give myself a hard time frame and I create some boundaries, I'm much more likely to spend that time focused on that particular project or on that particular task, and I'm more likely to complete it in that condensed time period. So a simple way to think about this is in the context of a deadline. So we're all familiar with what it feels like to be up against a deadline. And even though we sometimes wish that we had more time to prepare the work, we almost always find a way to get something done within, or get that thing done within that time frame, right? We say, oh, I wish I had, another 2 hours to work on this, or another day. But even though we say that, we often end up finding a way to get it done in the time frame that we have. The reason that works is because we approach our work with a deeper sense of focus when we are under time pressure. Right? That sense of pressure that we have compels us to compress and fit what we need to into this very well-defined time period, which leads to more efficient and focused work for us. So one way to make sure that we're not letting work just endlessly take over our day and spill into what should be personal time is to use Parkinson's law to apply what I would call like a soft pressure to the work that you do. So how would we apply this day to day? Here's the key application of this. Use it to outline and create well-defined work periods. So instead of going into a work period saying something like, I'm going to work on this, project this afternoon, go into that work period saying, I'm going to work on this project from 3:30 to 4:30. So in other words, don't start a work period without first assigning it a time budget. If you give it a time frame and then you keep your eye on the clock, that additional structure and light pressure will compel you to take more intentional action. So you might be thinking, and this is something that comes up all the time when I talk about this, what if it takes me longer than the time that I have allotted? That's no problem. If you get to the end of that time period, just take a moment to refocus and identify how much time you now think that you need to finish up based on how far it is that you've come. But what we're trying to do here is make sure that you're just not letting work go on and on forever without setting some time boundaries and having some more intentional control and direction through your work periods. Okay, fourth and finally, our workday rituals. So rituals are a huge part of what keeps us sane and on time and happy and productive. But now that we are working from home, a lot of those workday rituals that we used to have are gone. And we are being forced to work in a different environment under different circumstances. But what I want to encourage you to do is think really closely about how you might be able to recreate some of your old workday rituals and continue to incorporate them into your workdays now. So what are some examples of that? Here are 3 examples that might resonate with you. So first, you probably are working now within a few paces of your kitchen. Or you might even be working in your kitchen if you're like me. You can't see this, but my refrigerator and my sink are right over here to the left of me. So we have access to food and drink in a way that we didn't before. But if you're someone who used to pack their lunch the night before, or who would go through the ritual of preparing some food for the week on a Sunday night, or even if you're someone who would get up and leave your workspace and go grab lunch somewhere or order it, you should continue to do that, even though the food is within an arm's length of you right now. The ritual is something that allows you to continue to have this sort of definite shape and structure to your workday, and it's very familiar to your brain. So we want to try to recreate that. A second example would be things that you may have had in your old workspace that you only used in that workspace, and that again you would associate with your work or your workday. So maybe it's a special work mug, maybe it's a certain kind of material that you'd always have. Anything that you used to use at work that made it feel like work, right? You want to make sure that you're continuing to have those work-specific things be a part of your workday. We want to try to not blend using material like home materials or other things that might be lying around and mixing the two. We want to try to create to keep those two separate. And then finally, think about how you used to take breaks during the day and try to replicate those. So if you're someone who always went to lunch with 2 or 3 of your friends at noon, set up a time to eat lunch with them over a Zoom meeting or a FaceTime so that the 3 of you are eating together again. Or if it was your ritual to get up and go for a coffee run around 2 p.m. with one of your friends, make a cup of coffee and go on a walk and get them on the phone for 10 minutes, then go back to work when you're done. We really need to keep these kinds of things in our day. These are really, really important because they keep us in contact with people and they help us, again, define our workday. Okay, so to recap, our 4 concepts are concept number 1, morning and end of day routines. Concept 2, a well-defined workspace. Concept 3, Parkinson's law, and then concept 4 is workday rituals. To wrap this up, I want to give you 2 solid takeaways today. Number 1, remember to start small. pick one concept that we covered today and plan to integrate it into your workday, either at the end of today or on Monday. Remember, we are starting small with each of these changes because starting small will allow us to solidify new habits and new routines. Number two is to remember that we're focused on consistency and not perfection. If you miss a day or miss one of your new routines, no problem. There's no need to beat up on yourself. Instead, when you realize that you haven't engaged in that routine, or you've let work blend with personal or vice versa, that's okay. Just let it go and then direct that energy towards setting yourself up for doing it better the next day. Just a quick reminder that our next webinar is this Monday, May 18th. We'll be covering how to create a home workspace that is both comfortable but also functional. There are just a few key things you need to do to set up that kind of a space. And I have some ideas for you on that are backed by science and people who study this sort of thing all the time. So we'll be covering that important topic on Monday. Okay, let's spend some time taking questions if there are any. Okay, great question. The question is, I love this idea in theory, similar to the Pomodoro method, but have so much trouble actually following the timeframes. Any specific advice to adhering to it? Absolutely. It can be hard to get into the routine of having to block off some distraction-free time or using Parkinson's law to create a time block for us. What I would encourage you to do is start small. So sometimes what we do is we say, okay, I'm going to work on this for a 2-hour time period. But the problem is going for 2 hours at a time and trying to not have any distractions in that time can sometimes be a little bit too long if if we haven't practiced it. So my recommendation would be to set up a specific time frame that is a little bit shorter. And maybe if you have a longer project that you're trying to do and that you want to condense into this idea of Parkinson's law, split up that project into phases. So instead of saying, you know what, this is probably going to take me 3 hours to complete this project and I'm going to block off from 2 to 5 in the afternoon to do it, say, you know what, I'm going to cut this longer project into 3 or 4 pieces, and I'm going to take this first piece from 1:30 until 2, right? So try to condense it that way so that you give yourself a break. When we go for a little bit too long and try to fit too much into a longer time period, that's when it starts to break down. So that would be my #1 recommendation on this, is try to chunk out your projects so that you're not setting yourself up for failure on this one. Question #2, what does your morning routine look like? Need some inspiration? Sure, I will share my personal morning routine, and then I'll also share my work routine, my warm-ups for both. So I really have two ways that I start my day. One is my personal day, and then the second one is my work day. So when it comes to my personal morning, I have done the same 3 to 4 things over and over for a long period of time now. I think it's really important to start your day focused on you. So one of the things that we end up doing is edging ourselves out of the equation first thing in the morning in the name of helping other people, right? So the first thing we do is we pull up our phone. Who needs my attention right now? Who else do I have to respond to? Who's waiting on me to get back to them? I think it's a really good idea to sort of flip that and say, what do I need to do to help me show up at my best today? So over the years, I have practiced with a lot of things, and I've realized that for myself, I need a couple of things in the morning. First, I need a big cup of coffee. So I start my day with a big cup of coffee and a big glass of water. I literally get up from bed and I go and I drink a big glass of water. You become dehydrated over the course of the night. So drinking a big glass of water, first thing I do, then I have some coffee. For me, I really like to feel inspired in the morning. And so I will read something, even if it's just for 5 minutes, that's related to personal development. I have a couple of favorite books. If you're looking for recommendations, I am more than happy to give you my reading list. I'll send along to anybody who pings me. But I read for about 5 or 10 minutes, something inspirational. Then I will meditate. So I've been meditating for a couple of years now, really have seen such a transformation in me personally. Spend about anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes doing that. If you're interested in meditation, you don't need to do it for that long. I would suggest you start with 3 minutes a day, which is where I started. And I did 3 minutes a day, probably for a couple of months before it caught and I actually increased that amount. The last thing I do is incorporate some sort of movement into my day. So sometimes I will get up and I'll run for 15 or 20 minutes. Sometimes I'll just do some light stretching or some yoga or something like that. Anything that will kind of wake up my body. So that's my morning routine now. In the past, I've also journaled and done some other things, but I think if you're looking for some ways to really start your morning effectively, you'll want to think about how to take care of your mind first and then your body. And then once you've done that, then you can go serve everyone else. When it comes to my workday routine, I basically laid out for you exactly what it is that I do in that open up checklist. So I look first, before I ever open up my email, I look at my commitments for that day. What are the hard commitments I have on my calendar, just so I can orient myself to my workday. Number 2, I look at my project list, and we're actually going to talk about this in episode 5 or in webinar 5. I'm going to show you some techniques that I use and that we teach to our clients about how to structure your work, how to incorporate some time and task management principles. But I look and I say, what is the one major thing that I really need to get done today? What's the big thing I need to push forward? And I identify that and I prioritize it. I block off a distraction-free time block on my calendar. For me, it's about an hour now of time, and I might put 1 or 2 on my calendar. And then number 4 is I do think of what's the one thing I need to do to take care of myself today. And I mentioned a couple of examples of those before, and I repeat those throughout the workday. One thing I'll say before I kind of put a period on this thought, even though I have been practicing this for years and that I teach other people how to do this, it doesn't always go perfectly for me. It's not about it being perfect, right? Sometimes life gets in the way and we do our best to try to follow those routines over and over, but sometimes it doesn't work. But the good news is that we're not shooting for perfection. What we're trying to do here is add value to our day. So if we do 5% of the things that we want to in a day, that is a win. So your morning routine might not be perfect, but that's okay. Couple more questions here in the chat. Okay, doesn't look like any questions, just some comments. Any other questions before we call it a day? All right, we'll leave it for there today. Thanks again for joining, everyone. I would love to connect with you and really get your help spreading the word about this series. So if you could share with a friend or give us a shout out on social media, that would be awesome. I'd really appreciate it. Many of you did that after our last webinar. Really appreciate you telling people in your network about this. We really want to help as many people as we can right now have a better workday and be happier at work. Again, next webinar is this coming Monday at the same time. We will see you then. Go have a great workday.